Welcome to the Shield Your Business from Chaos podcast, where there's no building, no people, no third-party suppliers, and no systems all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
All right. Hi. Welcome to the Kingsbridge BCP podcast, where we talk about all things business continuity. My name is Roswitha Firth, and I am your host today and always. Before we get started with our guest, I'd like to say just a few words about Kingsbridge BCP. Kingsbridge BCP provides business continuity software planning and consulting services to a wide variety of companies in all industries. They've been in business since 1983. And they're the easiest to use software out there. You should really give them a look-see. My name is Roswitha Firth, and with me today, I have David Parker. It's my great pleasure to have David as our guest on the podcast today. David and I worked together many, many moons ago, and I really enjoyed my time learning from him, working with him. And so I'm really grateful today for your time and effort today. We're getting all fancy today. We're actually going to have a presentation rather than our usual conversation. It just happened to work out this way. And our topic today is preparing for a business continuity audit. So David currently is the Vice President of Regulatory Compliance for a large international energy company. And in his past life, he was in charge of business continuity planning, as well as other related adjacent fields, including audit. So David, let's talk about how did you wind up in BCP? I've actually hosted a couple of podcast episodes where we kind of talk about this very topic, because a lot of people don't necessarily start off their careers in business continuity, they wind up there. How did you wind up there?
That's a good question. First of all, Roswitha, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It was a pleasure working with you in the past, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you again today. How I got started in this, I guess when you graduate from college, you don't raise your hand up and say, I want to go into the BCP field. That didn't happen. Right. For me, early on in my career, I was a bit of a wannabe entrepreneur. Early in my career, I started several .com companies, okay, and didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about DR and BCP. I was solely focused on the tech savviness of my company, and unfortunately, we had several instances that really impact the businesses that we started, okay, and as a result, BCP and DR became a very important aspect of my business and my ability for the company to grow. We had to address BCP and DR. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, I eventually get away from the .com business and join the corporate world. Earlier in my career, I was an IT auditor, and given my background and experience in real time with BCP and DR, I was kind of pinpointed as that guy to lead the BCP and DR audit. So for the next 10 or 12 years, I did quite a few audits, and many of them were solely focused on BCP or DR. Conversely, I've always made it a practice of mine that when I do an audit outside of that, I at least, where applicable, try to add components to BCP or DR into those audits. So
good. Thank you. Thanks again for being here. Okay, so I'm going to kind of let you talk through. This is your best practices based on, I know, professional guidelines, but also loads of experience on preparing for a BCP audit. Okay. So I'll let you get started, and then I'll ask questions kind of as we go through, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Well, let's put disclaimers out there, right? There's probably a right way, and there's probably a wrong way. Today, I'm going to give you my way, the way from my own experience. If you were to go out into the internet world, you'll find quite a few business continuity audit programs. They're all great. There's some overlap between those and mine, but today I'm going to share you the way mine looks, or how I facilitated them. Okay, so what I'm going to start off with is share my audit process. But before I go into the audit process, I wanted to highlight scheduling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I think it's necessary to, every 3 to 5 years, I think, large organizations should go through a very rigorous, detailed business continuity program audit. Okay, so that's every 3 to 5 years. I'm not going to read all the list here, but the key aspects that I would look for fundamentally in a BCP program is what I call tone at the top, executive sponsorship. Is BCP matters communicated to the executives, to the board of directors, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I would also look to see is the business continuity program adequately funded. Okay, and then of course, I would expect to see drills and exercises and those type things. Right. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So this is a really good point, because in previous episodes, we've kind of touched on different aspects of audit, and audit's your friend. If you can build that relationship and leverage audit findings to help grow your business continuity program. So I think it's worth mentioning right now that budgeting and funding bullet as part of what you look for in an audit. The head of BCP, or the practitioner that's been put in charge of coordinating with the audit, has the potential of really getting that particular sore spot raised up to the highest levels, because if your program's not adequately funded, yeah, management might sign off and say it is what it is. But on the other hand, if it's actually an audit finding, then you may be able to use that to leverage additional funding in future cycles. So I think that's a really important thing to call out here, because most people run when they see audit coming, number one. And we're basically all underfunded. So that's a great point, that if you actually have that as what an auditor should be looking for, that handshake on the BCP side is for the BCP person to use that as leverage.
Yep, that's a very good point, Roswitha. And it's been my experience personally, but also in talking to some of my colleagues, what I've discovered is when they first introduce BCP auditing as part of their audit program, you'll find that a lot of this stuff doesn't exist. And the way audits work is, the findings are communicated to executive management, and they're communicated to the board, which will eventually most likely result in, okay, these are risks to the organization. We don't want these risks. Let's properly fund it. So, and a lot of times what you'll see is the first BCP audit will be kind of ugly, right? Lots of findings, but the outcome of that is you're going to get funded, right? And then after 3 years and you do another audit, you're hopeful that you'll see vast improvements. Okay, outside of the 3 to 5 year audits, what I typically do is annually, to make sure people are on their toes, I'll do spot audits. If we have findings from the big audit that occurs every 3 to 5 years, make it a practice to annually do follow-ups and then prepare a report of here's the status of those other remediation efforts. That way it doesn't go cold for 3 years, right? It's constantly being looked at. And this is just the way I handle the audits is I made a practice to separate business continuity with DR. I think those are two separate and vast type audits. I know there's overlap, but I personally like to focus on let's do a DR audit and let's do a separate BCP audit. Okay.
I wholeheartedly agree, because I think when you combine them, especially BCP and DR, the money goes to DR and the BCP is overlooked.
Yep.
Typically.
Yep. And lastly, if you're managing an audit department or you're an audit lead, uh, what I prefer to do is when you do a risk assessment and try to identify what all audits your team is going to perform in that given year, you'll have a wide variety of audits to plan for, right?
Right.
But I think there's always opportunities, each one of those audits, to incorporate either DR and or BCP into that program. So if you were to look at my audits that I performed in the past, they're not BCP, a lot of them are not BCP, right? But they may be focused on a system or an area or a business function. I'll add a section to the audit program to specifically look at BCP and DR, right? And based on all these audits where we, start looking at some of the gaps that we may find in BCP through this avenue, well, when that 3 and 5 year audit time window comes up for the big audit, we'll have lots of information and prior data to work with. Make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I'm going to progress to the next slide. Pre-audit planning. All right, this is where I think the big chunk of successful audit comes from. Okay, as much if you can get a core understanding of how your business works, that's going to help drive the audit. There's nothing more frustrating. I know a lot of people in your audience probably have been exposed to business continuity audits, and the auditor comes in and they're very green and they're reading audit steps, right?
Yeah.
Roswitha, are you familiar with that?
That was the big sigh. Yes.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
almost everybody is. It has been at some point. And it is really frustrating because you feel like you are going through an entire business continuity training program to train the auditor. And
yeah. And then inevitably you get a green auditor, they're going to start asking you questions about system recovery or DR this and that, and it's totally not not necessarily business continuity related, right?
Yeah.
So that's a critical point for me as a lead auditor doing a BCP audit. He or she, I think, needs to be well versed in the operations of the company, right? They know where the risks are. They know how the business activities go from one part of the organization to the other part of the organization to the next organization to the outside world, right? They know where all that input and output go, right? They inevitably, by doing so, you kind of get an idea of where the big risks are. So so step number one is being very, very familiar with your company and its inner workings, right? I would encourage the lead auditor to engage in both internal and external subject matter experts, okay? Outside of the organization, there's plenty of organizations and groups that you can leverage to gain knowledge of what new risk and evolving risk are to the industry, right? You're pulling that risk information in, which ultimately later on you'll convert it into, okay, here are the risks, and here's how I'm going to audit our organization for those risks. That makes sense.
Yes.
So once you collect those risks from the third parties, you got to do your homework and determine how applicable is those risks to my organization. And then I would recommend, you've probably seen this over and over again, but doing a study of the likelihood of that risk to the organization, and then what's its impact to the organization, low, medium, or high. If you get a high, then if it's a high likelihood and a high impact, you should by all means be part of your audit program that you're gonna test.
So your experience in audit, I know, is really broad. Would you say, just based on your own experience, that impacts are primarily underestimated or overestimated in financial or reputation? Where do people get it the most wrong in your experience?
It, again, I'm leveraging my own knowledge. In my opinion, I think that the impacts can be are accurate. Okay, at least
Do you
the
think
risk.
people get it right when they're estimating, by and large?
When the impact, yes. The
Okay.
likelihood, no. I find
Okay, there
the
you go. I should have asked
likelihood,
the right question
yeah,
there.
the
Okay.
likelihood I find is uh, it's not accurate, right? It's
Okay.
highly subjective. But in my experience, the impact is accurate. The likelihood is, again, subjective.
So I'm going to guess, my first guess is that we tend to underestimate the likelihood. But then I thought, well, maybe it depends on the type of event. Maybe we underestimate some and overestimate others. What's your sense on that, purely based on your own experience?
I think you're accurate when it comes to the likelihood. What I, what I've seen is the impact is, if it's a high impact and the event does occur, it does have a high impact. But what I've seen in at least the organizations that I work for is there's a lot of activities that are, I guess, already occurring with the organization that would minimize the impact, right? So from a third party looking in, if you factor in these other elements, the impact is probably not as high, as severe as you would think it is.
Okay. And then on the likelihood, though, do we tend to underestimate the likelihood of things, or does it depend on the type of event as to whether or not we under or overestimate how likely something is to happen?
I think we often underestimate the likelihood. Yeah.
Well, I know we underestimated the pandemic typically, like as a whole. I don't think people in this industry necessarily did, but people outside the industry sure did. Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, so I think we talked through the third parties, right? Again, as an auditor, a lead auditor, I think it's healthy to have good relationships with people outside your organization to start pulling that information. So that could mean attending conferences, being members of BCP organizations, and doing study groups and things like that. The next component, I think, is highly critical to a successful audit within your organization, right? And that is interviewing subject matter experts within your organization. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to not just jump into an audit, but there's a lot of work, valuable work that comes into play pre-audit, right? I already talked about being knowledgeable about the business, right? What I would expect to see during a BCP audit during the pre-planning phase is interviewing department heads or organizational heads, just having good, healthy, not got you type discussions, just trying to get an understanding of what risks do they see within their part of the organization. Okay. Jot those risks down. And what you'll find is you might have one department head that says, this is a high risk for us if this doesn't work out, and this is a low risk to us, right? And conversely, you talk to another department head and it's just the opposite, right? And then, so from an auditor, you got to collectively bring the two together to say that business process that he or she may own on this side, he or she views it as low importance, but the output over here is highly critical to this organization. And those department heads may not realize that, right?